joining me now is Green Senator Jordan Steele-John from our Perth studio. Thanks as ever for your time. Senator, I want to get right into, what actually these raids mean for press freedom and what we should do. But first of all, can I just clarify your position? Because there's been a lot of talk about, well, what did the government know? What did Peter Dutton know? The AFP says this was their operation, referrals from the department, no intervention. Do you accept that?
Well, I think we need to be, get ourselves across the full nature of the facts here, Tom. I mean, there have been commentary around, the government's ultimate role in referring these kind of things to investigation. But at the end of the day, I mean, we've got a situation here where the AFP are saying it's not our responsibility, we just enforce the law, and the government saying it's not our responsibility, we just write the law. And in between all of that is being lost the reality that these raids represent an unprecedented challenge to the nature of Australian democracy and press freedom that should concern every single Australian citizen.
Right, and I do want to get into that, but when you say we've got to get across the detail, as I said, we've had categorical statements from Peter Dutton, from Scott Morrison. They didn't know about these, they didn't refer them. I want to get into the laws as well, but I just think it's important to clarify this, that you've at least got confidence that the acting commissioner of the AFP was out there yesterday and was telling the truth. This was not a government-ordered thing. This was not them telling them when to raid, all that type of thing.
Well, I think what we need to do, Tom, is we need to find the proof of these things beyond the words in the actual documentation of the processes. And this goes to one of the fundamental issues around the AFP's management and the way it conducts itself, is there's very little transparency. And so we need to actually see the documentation. So what does that mean, the referral from the department
to investigate this? That's, once you see that, you'd be happy?
Well, and other documents besides. So we need to be able to see the entire picture that proves in its own words and existence the nature of how this situation came about.
All right, well, we'll see, I suppose, what comes out of it with various inquiries when Parliament resumes. As to the substance of this, we're essentially now talking about where is this line of public interest for journalists and whistleblowers, and what need do we have also to protect things within national security and sensitive information?
Well, I think we have a situation here, Tom, where the reality is that journalists here did some incredible work. They revealed to us the nature of war crimes that have been committed by Australian soldiers and the intention of very senior bureaucrats to attempt to turn the apparatus of the Australian surveillance state upon the public. They bailed the cat on these things and have faced these consequences because of it, and I think that should be a situation in which we answer the call to change the laws to ensure the support of journalists' ability to act in the public interest, not have a debate about whether or not certain actions did or did not break laws, which quite obviously, if they do criminalise such actions in the public interest, are not appropriate and need to be immediately amended.
So we'd have some sort of catch-all, because there is obviously a Public Interest Disclosure Act within the public service, but it doesn't have a general catch-all, if you like, of just public interest. It lists different areas. You'd have a catch-all for whistleblowers, for journalists. At the end of the day, you'd still need a judge, wouldn't you, to decide that, because there'd still be the attempt at prosecution. Someone has to decide what's in the public interest.
Well, ultimately, yes, you do need a proper, transparent, accountable process around these things, but what we're seeing is the result of decades and decades of mute bipartisanship as both the Conservatives and Labor have rammed through more and more legislation, often in the names of national security, that have expanded the scope of Australian surveillance powers and limited the ability of journalists to do their job in the public interest. Now, the Greens have been warning warning about this bracket creep in this policy area for years and years, and what we are seeing now is the results of many of the things that we've warned of. I mean, I think we need to really take a second to think about the international response to this issue. We've had the Director General of the BBC, governments, press associations around the world sounding major alarm bells about the ability of journalists to work and do their job here in Australia. And that is not something which we can just let go by in the name of, you know, so-called national security bipartisanship.
And as for how this actually would look, though, again, we have to rely, I suppose, on the judicial system. If we accept that there are some secrets that shouldn't get out, if there's no public interest, there still needs to be that test. Do we have a setup right now where that would be acceptably tested and decided upon?
Not currently, Tom, and this is one of the things that we are going to investigate. The Greens are going to investigate through our Senate inquiry into press freedom here in Australia, and through that process make detailed recommendations about how we can best support the existence of press freedom here in Australia. I think it's really interesting. We have often a lot of hot air, particularly on the right of politics, around this issue of so-called freedom of speech, and yet are particularly fine with granting the AFP the ability to delete or modify many of the files that they collected from Annika Smirkerth and the ABC just the other day.
To isolate on the other side of things, though, do you accept that when we're talking about national security, things within defence, whatever it might be, that there is a default, if you like, if a document's marked secret, it should be just that, unless there is that special case of public interest. Do you accept that as a default?
No, I absolutely do not accept that as a default. I think that this idea of, you know, something being made confidential in the name of national security has always been an incredibly dangerous precedent to exist, because it's a completely...
But what does that mean? Nothing can be confidential within security agencies?
Not at all. I'm saying the process by which things are classified as secret or in need of being kept confidential needs to be transparent and accountable, so that it can be. So that it is a system that can be trusted.
How many times about something that's kept secret? Wouldn't you have to say, we're not going to tell you about this, so we can't tell you the detail?
But the process at which we arrive at that classification can be made far more transparent. And I think that we have had so many instances in the history of both Australia and countries elsewhere where the classification of top secret, for your eyes only, etc., have been used to systematically cover up acts of criminal activity that it was the public's interest right to know. Right the way back to the Vietnam Papers, Edward Snowden, WikiLeaks, etc. So I think this bells the cat on a broader problem around the use of the classification of classifications around secrecy. But the first thing that we must do in supporting this process to act effectively is to support journalists to do their work and to make sure the legislation supports them to do that work as well.
Jordan Steele-John, thanks for your time.